It is so sweltering, like, I have no appetite, so this is just me running on, like, coffee and apple. So you will get so many interesting, fun, unfiltered thoughts. I hope you love them. Hello and welcome to a Maypril Roundup, Part 1. The reason we're doing a Maypril Roundup is because Maypril was 1 month for me this year. It was the month of migraines. It was weeks and weeks where I couldn't go 1 week without having absolutely debilitating symptoms that I do not recommend. If you don't get migraines, I'm so happy for you. If you don't know what they feel like, I am so happy for you, genuinely. And if you do know what they feel like, I am so sorry. Because they're the worst. They're the genuine worst. I'm extremely lucky that I am able, sometimes, depending on the severity of my symptoms, depending when I take my medication, how that all works, I am sometimes able to read with migraines. And I will be making a video about that at some point because people ask me about it. Like, what do you mean you can read when you have a migraine? That means you just have a headache. No, I have tricks. I have tricks. But I did manage to read, and in the months of May and April, or in the month of Maypril as we're calling it from now on, I read 21 books, which is a lot. I read so many books, and instead of just sort of running you through a list of all 21 books in chronological order I read them, I didn't think that would make sense. I didn't think you'd want to watch that. I don't know, maybe you do, let me know. But instead I decided to group them thematically, going from one to another, and just telling you about what my Maypril reading experience was like. So we're going to do a two-parter. The first part is going to have, let me check my notes, the first parter is going to have nonfiction, science fiction, and literary fiction. Kind of my comfort genres, kind of what I sort of, if people ask me what sort of stuff I read, that's what I will say. I read lit fic, I read sci-fi, I read interesting, to me, nonfic. And then part 2 is going to be a lot of fun because part 2 is going to be the stuff that I don't necessarily consider myself an aficionado of the genre, but I'm really getting into. We're going to be looking at the horror reads. The horror reads being specifically in the family horror genre, and you will see what I mean by that when that video is posted. And we'll also go into short story collections that largely include horror stories. That's going to be a world of fun. And then we will end with what I want to call light reads, but we can debate whether these were light reads or not. But that's what I will call them. They were my brain cleansing reads from everything else that went on. All right, this intro has been too long. Let's get to it. Let's talk about books, baby. Let's start with The Radium Girls. The Radium Girls is a fascinating nonfiction novel about women who worked in factories that largely produced fluorescent like watches, basically. The watch faces were painted with a paint that had a little bit of radium in it so that it glowed in the dark. How wonderful. And the way that they painted to make sure, because they were tiny watches, so you need a lot of precision. So what do? You take the paintbrush, stick it in your mouth, make it into a point, dip it in the paint, or dip, point, and then paint, and then keep doing that. Keep feeding yourself the radium as you do your painting job. What does that result in, you ask? That results in not just some of the first occupational health and safety lawsuits, which were fascinating to read about, and not just obviously like illness and death, but specifically teeth falling out and jawbones. There are so many descriptions of women like reaching into their mouths and just like taking out a piece of their jawbone, and they're like, oh no, that's my bone. And I don't know about you, but like that horrifies me. That just I'm being like somewhat sarcastic about it because I literally can't be serious about it because it's so horrific. Like, it is just a lot. It's a lot. This book is a lot and quite graphic, surprisingly graphic for what it is, and it is extremely well researched. This book follows many women who had these horrific symptoms. I think like a dozen women, if not 24, and they all basically worked at one of two factories, or like production companies, whatever you want to call it, working with radium, and there was so much denial that the radium was actually harmful. Everyone was like, it's not phosphorus, it's harmless, everything's fine. And it was absolutely not fine. And they had bone loss in the weirdest places. They had the weirdest like radiation poisoning symptoms. If you want to be afraid of radiation, this is a great book. I did, however, only give it 3 stars. The reason I gave it 3 stars is that it got very repetitive. It got very, very repetitive. And I don't necessarily think this is a fault of the book. I think it's accurate for the story because we see the same thing happening over and over again, basically. One of the young women, late teens, early 20s, late 20s at most, suddenly is getting very ill and her family's upset and they're going up and they're trying to get some justice for her, basically. But this kind of just keeps happening. It just kind of keeps happening. So it became very mundane, I gotta say, which is kind of unfortunate because I think it has the opposite effect of the intended effect. So I was horrified when I first read it, but by the end of it, I was almost desensitized to the plight of these women because it's like I kept being re-exposed to it over and over and over again. And that was obviously not the author's intention, so it's really a shame that that's sort of what ended up happening. That said, I do recommend it if you're interested in this topic. I know there's also an abridged version for kids that I kind of suspect might be a little better, just because it might be a little more condensed. Because one of the goals that the author had was to really present the women's individual stories. However, they kind of are the same, unfortunately. Maybe that makes me a bad person, probably. If you're interested in deep diving into corporate greed, following the plights for justice for about a dozen people and aren't bothered by this idea of excessive repetition. The other nonfiction book that I read in Maypril was perfectly titled for me because I am a person in a hurry. Not actually. I like to think that I practice some slow living, but I found the title of Neil deGrasse Tyson's Astrophysics for People in a Hurry absolutely hilarious. And I found the delivery spectacular. So even though I'm trained as a scientist, physics is something that I have shied away from always. My brain has never fully clicked with physics. It was one of the most challenging topics in university. I'm very strong at math, but somehow physics just doesn't click for me. I love calculus, but the moment forces are involved, I'm like, I don't know. I don't know what's happening. So I have very little background in astrophysics. Of course, I've heard of things like bosons and quarks and the fact that the universe is expanding and other stuff, the moons of Jupiter, I don't know, a bunch of other stuff. Neil deGrasse Tyson just like put it in the correct slots in my head. These words that were floating around, these concepts that I was like, I've heard of this, I'm not quite sure what it is. He just sort of sat down and he was like, okay, this goes here, this is what it is, this goes here, this is what it is, this goes here, this is what it is. It was the best. Like, I listened to the audiobook. It was a 4-hour audiobook. It felt like a long lecture, like a really fascinating lecture, and it was just so clear, so precise. I really, really liked it. I found it extremely accessible, and I listened to it read by the author, which, if you know anything about Neil deGrasse Tyson, he has an absolutely amazing, soothing voice. I loved it. It was so good. It was so good. I really recommend the audiobook experience. I especially recommend it if you are like, oh my gosh, the universe is so vast and so huge. I like, whoa, and you like the feeling of like, I am so tiny in the context of our solar system, of our galaxy, of other galaxies, of our universe. Whoa, what is it? If you like that, you will enjoy this book. But if you also like things like, oh, how did we name the moons of Jupiter? How did we name the moons of Saturn? Why is this called that? Why is helium called helium? If you like that kind of stuff, he dives so deep into naming conventions in a way that's absolutely adorable, and I really, really liked it. This happens about halfway through the book. I found it really useful. I found it really like, yeah, just sort of connected things in my head in a new way, and it really presented astrophysics as a playful discipline and a very human-centric discipline, and just so like, it was scrumptious. It was absolutely scrumptious. I really highly recommend this. I think I was just like in an astrophysics mood this April, because I picked up something that I have heard stellar comments on. I have heard that this book is fantastic, but I have a fear of starting series and disliking them, and I have largely shied away from series, especially sci-fi series. But this one really, really astounded me, and that is The Three-Body Problem. The Three-Body Problem is a book rooted in astrophysics, rooted in modern politics, rooted in what it means to be human, what it means for our species to be technologically developing as fast as it is or as slow as it is, what it means for like what quantum mechanics, the kind of implications that they have, and the writing in this was phenomenal. Phenomenal. I gave this 5 stars literally for the writing alone. So I listened to this book, which I really recommend, especially if you're not used to Chinese pronunciations of names and you don't necessarily know how to read stuff. That's something someone on my book Discord recommended. And I thought that was really useful because a lot of the characters are Chinese, the author's Chinese, and I still struggle with like accurately pronouncing names phonetically when I'm reading Chinese fiction. So I found having it read to me really good, but I also really enjoyed it because there's these beautiful descriptions that just having someone else narrate to you is incredible. There's a few specific scenes that really stand out to me, but they're just so evocative. So one of the scenes that stands out to me is this analogy done with a pool table where a physicist is explaining a concept to their friend and is using billiard balls on a pool table and moving it in different locations in time, different locations in the room, and repeating an experiment over time and using it as an analogy to explain a bizarre phenomenon that's happening on Earth. Another scene that I really, really liked, that was so neat and written in the coolest way, was one of our characters is haunted by these numbers that are just appearing. First, as little like negatives in his photographs, and he figures out what the numbers mean eventually, and as he starts to kind of freak out about them, they start appearing on the inside of his eyelids, and it's so like, it just has this like creepy eeriness to it that was stellar. And then what I didn't expect is there is a video game in this book. There is a video game, and we get to experience it. It's like a virtual reality survival game where you go to a planet where they don't have a 24-hour light dark cycle. They have very unpredictable suns rise and set. Nights sometimes last months and people freeze. Days sometimes last years and people burn because some of the days are more intense than others. And the point of the game is to try and figure out, can you actually predict these stable periods where the light dark cycle is normal, analogous to what it is on Earth, and these unstable periods where it's either like really bright forever, like the sun's always in the sky, or really, really dark forever and everyone's freezing. Because the civilization sort of relies on that, right? The civilization has this ability to go dormant, where if they know that there's an extended period of bad weather, whatever you want to call it, instability, they are able to go dormant and then be revived later when things are more stable and they can advance the civilization, and that way they don't basically die out every time there's an unstable period. And I won't discuss how the video game plays into the events of the novel because that feels like a spoiler. What I do want to say is the novel is told in a cyclical fashion. The novel is told in a cyclical fashion, meaning we get like details about something that don't make sense to us until we find out something else like way later in the book, and then that doesn't make sense until we find out something way later in the book. The narration's very like recursive, and we find out more and more as we go. I really enjoyed it a lot. I cannot wait to read the next 2 books. I loved this on audiobook. I'm gonna listen to the next 2 books because it was the best bedtime story. It was the best bedtime story. I absolutely loved it. If you have any interest in science fiction, and if you love beautiful writing, and if you have an interest in astrophysics and quantum mechanics and politics and humans and the possibility of aliens and all that kind of jazz, please read this. Please pick this up. It's a it's a thick tome, but it's just so worth it. It is so worth it. If you've seen my channel before, you know that I have a list of 23 books that I want to read in 2023, because why not? It's fun to do a little gimmick for a video. And I read one of those books. I read one of the sci-fi books, and my heart was broken by how little I enjoyed it. My heart was genuinely broken, and that book was The Fifth Season. I thought I would love The Fifth Season. I love sci-fi. I love feminist sci-fi. I've suspected that N.K. Jemisin would like really speak to me, and I really actually quite liked it for the first like 20-30% of the book. And in general, the writing was really good. I enjoyed the writing a lot. And then just as the book progressed, it kept losing me. And by the end of it, I gave it 2 stars, and I don't even have an interest in continuing the series, which is so surprising. As I wrote in my Goodreads review, I went into this book with the wrong expectations. I think I expected something more about like climate fiction, and I expected like more nitty-gritty stuff, and I expected way higher stakes and more stuff happening, frankly, or more commentary. I went into this book thinking that I would love it, and I expected to really like feel a lot, and it just didn't resonate with me. And I think I'm in the minority when it comes to this book, so I don't want to discourage you from reading it if it's on your TBR. The book follows 3 women at very different stages in their lives who all seemingly have this ability to control inorganic matter. So they can control like seismic activity, cause or stop earthquakes, control bedrock, things like that. And on this planet that may or may not be Earth, very unclear, on this Earth-like planet, in some version of the future, the past, the alternate reality, whatever you want to call it, they are seen very negatively by the rest of society. They are perceived as threats and or weapons to be used and trained, and therefore not seen as human. So we get to kind of experience that stigma through them. We get to see how the youngest one of them goes through this academy for people with this ability. And that's always fun. Like, it kind of had like magic school vibes, and she was like being bullied at this magic school and had to take her revenge, and then found out secrets and, the kind of like YA stuff that is fun to read about. It's fun to read about. It's kind of an overdone trope, but it's overdone for a reason, because it's fun to read about. And then we follow another woman who our main character, her son is murdered because it is discovered that he has this ability as well. She's been hiding her own ability and her children's abilities from the village, and she finds her son dead and her husband gone with their daughter, who also has the ability. So she goes on the road to try and find her husband, who kidnapped said daughter, and hoping her daughter is alive. And she's sort of like reflecting on her life, and she meets unlikely companions on the way, and they travel, and we find out more about what's going on. And this book also has the sense of stable periods and unstable periods. So sometimes the Earth is fine, and then sometimes there's a 5th season, which is an unstable period where there are a lot of earthquakes, a lot of seismic activities, tsunamis happen, weird weather stuff happens. Everyone like freaks out about it because it can be the end of a civilization. It can last a little while, or it can last a very long time and lead to like volcanoes exploding and creating, massive clouds in the sky, blotting out the sun, all the crops die, all that kind of stuff. So she's traveling at the beginning of one of these like suspected 5th seasons. So everyone she meets along the way is like really like nervous and also suspicious about her. And then she also meets someone who is strange but isn't suspicious of her and is a small child. And that's always fun. Who doesn't love a magical small child? We love that. And then our third character is aged between this young girl going to the academy and this older woman searching for her daughter. She's in between age-wise, and she is basically on a mission to have the baby. She's sent by the organization that controls people with these abilities to go and have a baby with one of the most powerful people who has these abilities in order to basically generate more children that are super powerful that the organization, government, whatever you want to call it, can control. And they don't like each other. They don't want to have babies together. That doesn't interest them, but they still have to. And then they engage in various rebellious shenanigans because why not? And of course, the three stories come together eventually. They come together in a way that I personally found very predictable. I think a lot of people are like, oh, but I genuinely feel it was very predictable and kind of very obvious about halfway through the book. I don't want to say more about that because I feel like if I say literally anything else, you'll be like, oh, that's the plot twist. And I don't even know if it qualifies as a plot twist. I've probably spoiled it for you. I'm sorry. But if that is enough to spoil it for you, just knowing that there's a plot twist, then I don't know if that's that good of a plot twist. And I think that's one of the things that bothered me in the book was the framing of the story. I didn't think it was as clever as I wanted to be. And I think it detracted from the things that were interesting. So the reason I ended up not reading this book very well is just because the balance of what I found interesting to what I found kind of repetitive from things I've seen before, predictable, recycled material essentially was just so off. Like there were so many things I wanted to know more about and so many things I was more interested in, and they were almost these like passing thoughts, and then there were all these like scenes that just I'm like, yes, we've seen this before. We've seen this before in so many kinds of fiction. So I would recommend it if you typically read this kind of stuff and you like all these tropes. I think it's a very well written book. It just did not resonate with me. And that's always what a 2-star rating is for me, is this is well written. There are people who will think this is fantastic. I am just not one of them. It's just, it does not mesh with me, and that is okay. My Goodreads review, I wrote, recommended if you like misfits trained in a guild or if you really like rocks. I think that's the other thing. I'm not huge on rocks. I rock climb, but I rock climb plastic rocks. So maybe once I start climbing outside, I'll be more into rocks and enjoy this more. I think in my real life, I really strive towards cozy core. However, I don't think cozy core fiction is for me. And this was really, really evident with A Psalm for the Wild Built. I don't like that I didn't like this. I really wanted to like this. It's supposed to be so wholesome. This is a book about a tea monk who is basically a little human being who travels around with their little tea cart and serves as a sort of like bartender therapist hybrid, offering people the tea they need and chatting with them and providing them with cozy comforts. I'm like, that's so wholesome. I love that. That's adorable. And this tea monk meets a robot. And that is particularly noteworthy because humanity at this point in time is living in this sort of like eco-utopia where they are all robots have left. All robots have left to the other side of the planet. Humans don't use robots anymore. They live in unison with nature, in harmony. Everyone's kind of happy and vibing and lying in the sun and eating fruit and all that kind of amazing stuff that personally I would love to do all the time. And this is the first human-robot contact in a very, very long time. And I love the trope of like a humanoid thing or alien trying to understand human beings. I think it's a great trope. I absolutely loved it in, gosh, one of those Andy Weir books. You know which one I'm talking about. Not The Martian, the other one. Project Hail Mary. I absolutely loved it in Project Hail Mary. It was so fun. It just didn't work for me here. It just didn't work for me. I found that the insights weren't interesting or original. Like, I haven't even read that much of this genre of fiction, but I just didn't find this very compelling. The book was very heavily based on exposition, and I'm not really a high fantasy reader. I don't really care so much for world building, so that did not resonate with me. And then the general message of the book was like, you don't need to be productive, you can just exist and be worthy. Which, like, okay, great, lovely, but it's just presented in this very, like, little Instagram infographic. Like, I didn't get more from this book than I do get from, like, an Instagram screenshot of the tweet, human beings were meant to lie in the sun and eat fruit. So I guess I just wanted something more. I just wanted something a little more, I don't know. And I'm really disappointed because I have been wanting to get into Becky Chambers. A lot of people who read some of the stuff that I do really enjoy Becky Chambers. I have a copy of another one of her books, and I do want to give it a try. But this one just did not resonate with me. Again, so this was a 2-star read. I think there's lots of people who would enjoy it. I'm just not one of them. I'll give you my last sci-fi book, and I really went from best to worst. Because this one, I don't really know who would enjoy it. I don't remember who recommended this book to me. If it was one of you, I am so sorry. If it was not one of you, this is an anti-recommendation for the dog stars. It doesn't get better. If you don't like the first 20%, you will not like the book. It does not get better. The Dog Stars is the story of Hig, who 9 years after a super deadly flu, like think of the Stan situation, less than 1% of the population survives. He's living in a little airport in, like, I always forget the state, like Pennsylvania. He's living in, like, a little airport with his dog and this guy whose name I don't even remember. I remember his first name was Bruce because that was, like, supposed to be funny at some point. I don't know. Bangley? Bruce Bangley. Yeah. He's living with Bruce Bangley, and Bruce Bangley is, like, an ex-Marine, super tough guy, and he's like, we will secure the perimeter and attack anyone who comes to hurt us, and we will survive this apocalypse, and it's, like, super survival-centric. And Hig is a little more chill, but largely he's just mourning the fact that he has been alone just with this Bruce Bangley guy, and his dog Jasper for the last 9 years, and he misses his wife, and he has a lot of regrets about how the flu came about, and a lot of regrets about the last days with his dying wife, and all that kind of stuff. And I love post-apocalyptic fiction. I think it's amazing. Some of my favorite books are post-apocalyptic books, or like isolation stories. Like, one of my favorite books that I read recently was Good Morning Midnight. And again, I think this is the problem when you know you like a genre, you go in with certain expectations. And I really went into this expecting a meditation on grief, tragedy, solitude, rebuilding, and just none of that was there. Instead, I learned a lot that I didn't want to learn about. Largely about planes. Our main character, Hig, he's a pilot. He flies a lot. Good for you, Hig. Love that for you. But that doesn't vibe with me. That just does not vibe with me. And he flies his plane. And I will literally just spoil the book because it annoyed me. Okay, so Hig is on his adventure, and he leaves Bangley at some point and just hangs out with his dog Jasper, and then Jasper dies. And Hig's grief when Jasper dies was the only part of the book I actually enjoyed reading about, and this is probably because I'm still very heavily grieving my own animal companion, my cat who died 3 months ago. So I was like, yes, finally, something I'm emotionally connecting with. That's what I was looking for. And then that just sort of fizzles out, and instead he ends up finding... He ends up having to kill a bunch of people, and Bangley is, like, talking in his ear. I forget, they're, like, connected by radio or whatever. And Bangley's like, there are 9 people behind you. You only have 6 bullets. Here's your tactical plan. And he, like, executes the tactical plan perfectly, and he survives, and everyone runs away. Yay. And this kind of keeps happening. And not super interesting. But then Hig sees a woman. A flesh and bone woman for the first time. In 9 years. And she's with an older man, and he's like, please be her dad, not her husband. Please be her dad, not her husband. Please be her dad, not her husband. And the guy is her dad. So Hig can get with the woman. The rest of the book went exactly how you'd expect it to. I won't even spoil it for you. I was really hoping, and I was really expecting for Bruce Bangley, super strong Marine, talking into Higgs' ear, Higgs sometimes imagining his presence, to just be a Tyler Durden situation. I thought Higgs had gone crazy, and was imagining this guy who was supporting him, and I thought that would have been more interesting. But no, this guy actually exists. This super tough one-dimensional ex-Marine totally exists and is possibly the most boring character on the planet. And Hig gets the woman and saves her father, and they all live happily ever after. I'm literally not joking. I just... Stay away is all I'm saying. Please stay away. I really tried so hard to enjoy this. And on top of that, the book is written in experimental fashion with chopped up sentences, no dialogue demarcation, because it's supposed to be like fast-paced and Higgs-9 and all that, but it just doesn't... There isn't enough substance in this book to carry all of that. There just isn't. It's just one of my biggest disappointments. One of my biggest disappointments of April. I was looking forward to this. Pretty bummed out. So this is another book I really wanted to like, and it got a 2-star because I know a lot of people who really liked this book. It did not work for me. And that is The 7 Moons of Maali Almeida. And I think it's just because I've read 38 Minutes and 10 Seconds by Elif, which kind of follows the same concept, but I think does it in a way more interesting way and in a way better way. So this is a story set in Sri Lanka, and I've never read any Sri Lankan literature, so that was part of the reason that I ended up finishing this book, was literally just to learn a little more about the politics, the situation, and what the author wanted to present to us of their country. So we're told the narrative through Maali Almeida's eyes after he dies. This man is very dead, goes to heaven, and heaven's like, yo, do you remember how you died? And it's like, no, I do not. And it's like, let's find out. You have 7 moons to do it. And he's like, oh, 7 months, great. No, 7 days. That's how many times you see the moon in 7 days, 7 times. So you have 7 days. And I say you because this whole book is narrated in second person through the perspective of the person being narrated. Like, it's narrated as if it's talking to Maali, but Maali is the one whose perspective we see, and that just did not work for me. That just did not work for me. It actually, I found it very frustrating, very annoying, because we have this sort of semi-omniscient ghost situation who conveniently doesn't know some stuff, but conveniently really does know other stuff. And it just was weird. So of course we find out a bunch of stuff out of order. We find out about Maali's family, about his career as a political photojournalist, and the sort of like horrific photos of terrible things that he has, about his various amorous pursuits that may or may not be socially acceptable in Sri Lanka, and all that kind of stuff. Very early we find out, for instance, that we found his arm but not his head. That's pretty bad. And the book is kind of just that 7 times for 7 days. And it just really, I really struggled to emotionally connect with it. I really struggled to follow it in some parts because we get things very fragmented, and again through this sort of like mixed perspective that ends up being kind of confusing for the reader. And I just really didn't find myself connecting with this at all. I'm happy that I finished it. I'm happy that I didn't DNF it, and I respect it as a piece of art. But this was absolutely not the book for me. I'm sure there are plenty of glowing reviews. I think it won one of the big prizes this year or last year, and I see that merited. It is a great piece of art. It is very much like a literary achievement, but I did not enjoy my experience of reading it. And yeah, if you want the like ghost reflects on their past and we learn about the history of a certain strata of people in a specific country, I recommend Elif Shafak's 10 minutes and 38 seconds in this beautiful world. Is that what it's called? That one's fantastic. It's set in Istanbul. It's gorgeous. And I really enjoyed it. So that is like this is an anti-recommendation in favor of another recommendation because this just did not resonate with me. Sorry. So I hit the lit fic genre and I was debating when I did my little sectioning of how will I summarize Maypril, whether to stick this into short stories or lit fic, but really it's one connected story that changes focuses. So I will tell you now about the book that I finished last night, which is the second in Before the Coffee Gets Cold. The book is Tales from the Cafe. And we love the cafe. It's very simple. It's a little Japanese cafe, and there's one table where a ghost sits. And once a day, the ghost gets up to use the bathroom because the ghost is drinking coffee all day. Listen, they have needs. And at that point, if you're a visitor at the cafe, you can sit down at that table, ask for one of the owners to pour you a cup of coffee, and you can go back in time or into the future and stay there before the coffee gets, as long as the coffee's still warm. You cannot leave your seat. You cannot travel more than once, and you have to finish your coffee before it gets cold, or you become the next ghost. So that's fun. High stakes. And what these stories explore really are the fleetingness of relationships between people. It's like the regrets of things unsaid. So people go back in time. Most of the time, we have one story that goes into the future, and I really enjoyed that. I found that very interesting. But for the most part, people are going back in time to say things that they wish they told their loved ones like 5, 10, 30 years ago. Or to see their loved ones who have died for kind of one last time, and they only have a few minutes. They only have like 5, 10 minutes because this coffee, is the cup made of ice cubes? Like my cup of coffee stays way warmer than what is described in this book. I think the mug is like physically a cooling mug, or they're already just pouring lukewarm coffee and then putting ice cubes in, and they're like, chop chop, you got 3 minutes, let's go. All that said, though, it is gorgeous. It's written in just this like gorgeous, ephemeral, magical realism, sentimental style. And if you're just looking for sentimentality, if your heart is just kind of sad and you want to reflect on the fleetingness of human relationships and on death, because that's a lot. It's a lot about death and loss and things unsaid. If you want that, read the first book. And if you've read the first book and you want literally like more of the same, read this one. And I say literally just more of the same because this does not innovate on the first book. It is just part 2 Electric Boogaloo, you know what I mean? But it's still really good. I still gave it 4 stars. It was wholesome. It made me happy. It made me want to tear up a little. And what else do you want from literary fiction? That is the mark of good literary fiction. Last book that I'll tell you about in my Maypril Wrap-Up, in the literary fiction section, and in the part 1 of this wrap-up, will be a 5-star book that I ate up. This book did things to my heart, and I loved it. I loved it. And I think I am now an Elif Shafak stan, and that is The Island of Missing Trees. So I mentioned 10 minutes, 38 seconds. Like, I liked it, but I didn't, like, love it. It wasn't a 5-star. This is maybe one of my top books of all time, possibly because I am the target audience in certain senses. So let me tell you about this book. This book is set in multiple timelines, like multiple time points along a family saga, and I love a good family saga. Love it. Love a good family saga. So it's set in multiple time points. We are in Cyprus. I will say Cyprus. If that's wrong, yell at me in the comments because that drives engagement and that's what we're here for, baby. set in Cyprus. And Cyprus, which I didn't know about actually, I thought Cyprus was Greek, just kind of by extension. And I'm not sure where that belief comes from, but I wasn't aware that there was a whole like Turkish Muslim side of Cyprus and that there was essentially a civil war that was ongoing forever. So the people sort of live not quite on top of each other, but on top of each other and separate. So there's a big difference between being Greek and being Greek Cyprian and being Turkish Cyprian. Huge difference. The Christian Greeks, the Muslim Turks. And we start with a love story of a Greek boy and a Turkish girl who absolutely adore each other and just want to be with each other. And they manage to do this by meeting in this little cute like bar bistro tavern. I think it's like a tavern. And this tavern has a tree inside it. Like it has like a little court and a little fig tree that grows there. And the fig tree is the narrator of the book for half of the book. Like a bunch of chapters are written from the fig tree's perspective, which was... I have very, very mixed feelings about these sort of like narrative experiments. Sometimes an inanimate object narrating backfires completely, but in this case, I think it worked really, really well. But if that's not your thing, don't read this book because literally half the chapters are from the perspective of the fig tree. So this fig tree lives in this tavern, and this tavern is run by two people, Yorgos and I'll start with a Y. Oh no. I want to say Yemen, but that's not his name. Okay, Google helped. Yorgos and Yusuf. There we go. Yorgos and Yusuf run this tavern. And we love them. So one of them's Greek, one of them's Muslim. They are lovely. They are very close, if you catch my drift, as the book makes abundantly clear. They are very close, and they offer these two teenagers, the young Greek boy and the young Turkish girl, they offer them a place where they can meet in secret away from their family and be together, basically. And the tree gets to see their romance. And then we fast forward into the future, into modern day in the UK, where the daughter of the Greek boy and the Turkish woman is in high school, and she's having a rough time. Like, she is having some like mental health identity crisis stuff because her mom, the young Turkish woman that we met, died that year under very questionable circumstances. And we find out slowly that her mom had a lot of mental health issues and struggled with alcoholism and had what, for better word, is a tragic and mysterious death. And she feels like her family's so eccentric, and she struggles to fit into the UK, even though she was born there. And she struggles with her identity as Cyprian and also as English. And she's never been to Cyprus. And her parents have not told her a lot about like their identity. She knows a little bit about it. She's never met her grandparents. She's never met her aunt, like her mom's sister. And her dad is so eccentric. Her dad is like an academic, and he's super obsessed with the fig tree in their backyard that was grown from a cutting of the fig tree from that tavern from 40 years ago. So he's like literally taking care of the fig tree, and like the book opens with him explaining that they need to bury the fig tree for the winter, which, like, how do you bury a tree? There's a diagram. There is a diagram and a full explanation about how to bury a fig tree. It's great. So you bury it for the winter so that it survives the winter. And then, of course, at the end of the book, it gets unburied because where else would the symbolism be? So this fig tree like symbolizes everything to him. And as the book progresses, we find out his story, the mother's story, and we find out more about the daughter. And one of the cataclysmic events is that the mother's sister, who the daughter has never met, who didn't even come to the mother's funeral, decides to visit. And the daughter is angry at this woman. She's like 16 and mad, because that's when tragedy happens in your family and you're 16, you're angry. Especially if you're a child of immigrants and don't really fit into society. I totally didn't identify with this character at all, of course not. But then the story unfolds, and we learn more and more from flashes to the past We find out what happened between our two lovebirds when they were young, what happened between them when they were older, because they had their daughter when they were like in their late 30s, early 40s, but they were meeting in Cyprus when they were like 18. So we're like, what happened? What happened in those like 20 years? I think it's actually 25 years, which is, we don't know what happened for the longest time. We don't know what happened to Yorgos and Yusuf for the longest time. It's a mystery, actually, because they very suddenly disappear from this tavern, and the tavern is vandalized. And we don't know this mother's sister, like our teen girl's aunt. We don't know much about her and why she's here and what's going on and why wasn't she present in this child's life until now. And as everything unfolds, and there's so much pain in this family, there's so much pain, and there's so much trauma, and there's so much loss, and it's tied to the politics and horrors that occurred as part of the civil unrest in Cyprus. And it's all a metaphor for like the resolution, and it's just, oh, I loved it. I loved this so much. I loved it. And I guess it just really appealed to me specifically, given that I am in an interracial relationship and I am a child of immigrants who was born after all the political unrest that led to immigration, and the themes of mental illness and intergenerational trauma and culture clashes were all so close to me. This book just got under my skin. This book got under my skin, and I absolutely loved it, and I just wanted to highlight everything. The writing was gorgeous. Again, half of this book is narrated by a tree. Because the tree tells us what it saw when it was in the tavern, and what it saw from the backyard in the UK. And I love it. Sometimes the tree, literally there's little bits where a bird comes to the tree to like tell it what it saw. And these are really the only like magic realism elements of it, but just like a little bit of magic realism in a family saga is my exact cup of tea. So if you loved everything I just told you, you're gonna love this book. If you think a tree telling you a story is ridiculous, don't touch it. This book is not for you. Don't touch it. Don't touch it. I have other recommendations, and this will not vibe with you because literally that is half of the book. If you find family sagas annoying, don't touch this. Don't touch it. If you don't like flawed characters and a lot of humans making like bad decisions, don't touch this. I love humans making bad decisions. I love weird magic realism. I love metaphor. This was the best. This was one of my favorite books I've read in Maypril. 5 stars. 5 absolute stars. This is going to be one of my top books of the year. I can feel it. And I could feel it from like the first 3 pages. This was... To think I almost didn't pick this up. To think I almost didn't pick this up. And honestly, that's the sentiment I want to leave you with in this first part of my Maypril wrap-up, is that a lot of these books defied my expectations in both directions. There were books that I thought would be 5-star reads and were 1 or 2 stars. And there were books that I didn't think I'd be interested in, and then they just blew my mind. Blew my little kitty mind. Amazing. Amazing. I don't know what else to say. So the moral of the story, kids, is read. Reading's amazing. And sometimes there will be disappointments, and sometimes you will find absolute gems. And I have more gems to tell you about. There will be a part 2 because I'm looking at my recording and we're at 56 minutes of footage, baby. That's way too long. That's way too long. So you will get more. Stay tuned. It's coming. It's coming. We're out of migraine season. Hopefully, there's supposed to be a thunderstorm tomorrow. Please pray for me. We're hopefully out of migraine season. I want to be back. I have so many books to tell you about. I have so many bookish stuff to tell you about. I am buzzing with joy. And okay, I'll talk to you super soon to tell you about short stories, family horror, and less mentally taxing reads, like light reads that include some YA thrillers, because why not? Who doesn't love a YA murder mystery? Okay, have a great rest of your day. You're the best. Read something fantastic. Tell me in the comments. Again, we're driving the algorithm beast. Tell me in the comments what your favorite read of Maypril was. And how do you feel about Maypril? Did you have a good Maypril? Mine was terrible. How was yours? I hope you read something really fantastic very soon. Okay, bye.